Good afternoon, everyone. Um, a very good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're connected from at this particular moment. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all today at the African Center Studio Women's Creative Exchange. And this is true because as my office, which is the Office of the Special Assistant to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on art, culture, tourism, and creative economy, is a partner with the African Center to lead this workshop. And that has converged together Africans, female creatives who are committed to shaping the narrative and the way Africa tells our own stories. I would like to begin by applauding each and every one of you for taking the first step to register to be a part of this. And it shows how intentional and passionate we are, to the future of Africa. And it's highly commendable. For a bit of a background, this office was created in 2023 under the administration of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as the very first of its kind in Nigeria. And in carrying out its task, we place the culture and creative industry at the very heart of our work, showcasing the extraordinary vibrancy and diversity that Nigeria is blessed with. But today, it is my joy that we are able to go beyond the borders of Africa, of Nigeria, and for us to be part of something that does not just only unveil one's national brilliance, but rather unveils the cultural and creative brilliance of the entire continent. Across this workshop series, the African Center has explored different sectors within the creative industry. And for me, in developing this particular session, I deliberately chose to spotlight photography. And not just because of the fact that I hold photography daily. I started as a photographer. I feel I'm still a photographer. But also because it is a field where women across Africa are visibly excelling. And when we're talking about women across Africa, we're talking about, likes of Tolani Ali, T.Y. Bello, Polly Irugo, to Felicia Aban, and of course to Nengi Nelson, our guest speaker for today. Photography has become a powerful space where women continue to define the narrative, capture our realities, and project the strength of our continent to the world. And today, at this very moment, I am rest assured that many of you in the near future will have your names added to the list of impactful female photographers who have emerged from Africa. So permit me to tell you today that this space is undeniably a fertile ground for your potential and your emergence. So I implore you to seize it and use this opportunity so seriously. That is why in designing the workshop, we are deeply intentional about bringing you not just any speaker, but the right person, the best hand to show you how possible it is to rise, to excel, and to become an embodiment of excellence in this field. Therefore, without taking much of our time today, allow me to open the floor for our guest speaker to be properly introduced by the African Center. I wish you all the very best, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that welcome. And before I go ahead and introduce Nengi, on behalf of the Africa Center, I would like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. For those who joined us for our last two workshops, welcome back and bear with us as we go over some details for everyone who is new here today. I'm Temi Ibiraba, a policy consultant and editor on the Africa Center's policy team, along with Tunde Olatunji, the Associate Policy Director at TAC. With the sponsorship of MasterCard Foundation, our team at TAC has designed the Africa Center Studio Women's Creative Exchange, a monthly workshop series and fund taking place between July and November 2025. In addition to the workshops, 3 participants with a business or a business plan will be selected to receive an investment of $2,000 each after attending 3 out of 5 workshops and submitting a reflective prompt. For more details on what's required to receive the fund and to register for future workshops, please visit the Africa Center Studios webpage, which is linked in the chat. Everyone who attends at least 3 workshops, regardless of having a business or plan, will receive a digital certificate for their LinkedIn pages. MasterCard Foundation gave us this fund and said they wanted to impact young Africans, allowing us to design it how we see fit. We decided we wanted to financially empower African women creatives through it. We created a format where our pre-selected workshop leaders choose one guest speaker for their workshop. We picked our workshop leaders by identified organizations with proven expertise in supporting entrepreneurship within the creative economy for women in West Africa. Today's workshop leader is Ayomide Adeagbo, an award-winning photographer, photojournalist, published author, creative, and founder of Extreme Media, with a career spanning over a decade at the intersection of photography, journalism, and politics. Through his passion for photography and a heart for change, he sensationally impacted the media space in Nigeria, blazing the trail for fellow creatives. Ayomide has served as the SA Visual Communications and personal photographer to the Speaker of the Ninth House of Representatives, where he stood as a testament to the relationship between creativity and governance. Afterwards, he was the head of digital communications, Office of the Executive Vice Chairman at the Nigerian Communications Commission. He is now the special assistant to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on art, culture, and the creative economy, where he works towards ensuring the creative industry is at the forefront of national affairs. In 2025, his office held the Empowered Summit for Nigerian women to lead, innovate, and reshape the future of the creative and digital economy. This year's theme was Accelerate Action to underscore the urgency of equipping women with the tools to transform their creative passions into profitable ventures. When the Special Assistant's Office suggested Nengi as a guest speaker, we were once again impressed by her wealth of experience, just like our past two guest speakers. Nengi Nelson is a Lagos-based visual artist whose work intersects photography and film. She is best known for her striking monochrome photographs that capture the evolving and nuanced landscape of Lagos. Her inspiration is drawn from films, everyday life, and the issues that impact her immediate environment. She recently completed a 3-week residency at the Gas Foundation, where she continued her ongoing body of work titled All the Places I Have Lived, a project that investigates the concept of home through the experiences of individuals who have reverse migrated. Nengi's work has been exhibited in several notable spaces and festivals, and she has been commissioned and published by leading global and regional organizations such as the BBC, Gucci, Atlas, IFAD, Reuters, and many others. And now for a bit about TAC and our session today. The Africa Center is a think tank and cultural center based in New York City, where we focus on policy, culture, and business. We are a multidisciplinary institution focused primarily on narrative shifting surrounding the continent of Africa. For us, we believe it's important what information gets to shape the world's understanding of a place and its people, but also who gets to communicate it. As a result, we work to center perspectives from and of the continent and conversations that pertain to them. As part of that work, we put on regular public programs such as this one today. At the end of today's session, visual storytelling for social and creative impact, there will be time for a brief Q&A, so please pop your questions in the chat throughout the workshop, and we will get to them at that time. And once again, on behalf of the Africa Center, thank you for joining us here today. We look forward to seeing you at future workshops. And now finally on to Nengi.
Hi guys, thank you so much for the introduction to me. And thank you so much, Ayomide, as well. It is such a pleasure. Can you guys hear me? Just put a thumbs up in the comments if you can hear me. I just want to make sure. But yes, thank you so much, Ayomide, as well. Thank you to the Africa Center for putting this together and like giving me the opportunity to share about my work and this topic as well. That means a lot to me. I'll jump right in and I'll share my screen. So for just so that I have two different screens. I have the one where the presentation is on and I have the one where the video is. So whenever I have to check the comments, I have to do a quick like move over here just so that you understand why I'm moving between screens. So I'll quickly share. Kindly let me know when you can see my screen. Okay, I can actually see the chat here as well. So yeah, this is the visual storytelling for social and creative, thank you, impact. And Timmy has already thankfully gone through this, so I don't have to do it again. But just a brief thing about myself. My work focuses a lot on like identity. I like to think about like who we are as people and community, and a lot of times how we interact with like shared public spaces. And my work cuts across photography, film, and I'm also a production designer as well. I think that in Nigeria you have to kind of like embody multiple spaces to succeed. So yeah, feel free if you're doing multiple things, it's absolutely fine. So for the objectives for this class today is something I would really like us to do is understand what visual storytelling is, and just like touch on a few core principles that guide that in photography. Finding your voice as an artist or as a photographer, as a storyteller generally, and how to tell your own unique story, and balancing ethical storytelling and cultural sensitivity, and maybe also touch on what like economic opportunities are available to you when you become a photographer or when you decide to become like a full-time photographer. So generally, when I was doing some reading about this class, like I came across this on the Michigan University where they talked about how like visuals are processed about 60,000 times faster than text. And I find that a lot of people are even, you hear people say I'm more of a visual learner than I am like a reader. Most people don't like to read. They prefer to just like see text or like watch video or sometimes listen to things, and it helps them understand things better. So I thought that was important for us to kind of like note that. So what is visual storytelling? Visual storytelling is pretty much like the process of communicating through visual media. Now there are different kinds of ways you can tell stories using visuals. It can be using like data descriptions, you can use video, you can use pictures, you can use like slideshows. But for the focus of this class, which is photography, we're talking about photography as a tool for visual storytelling. So yeah, in photography, it involves taking pictures, but just going beyond just taking pictures. It's curating images with intention and adding context, adding meaning, and inviting your viewers to engage on it on a much deeper level. So it is just telling like a full story. I know as photographers, like when you start out, you want to perfect that single image, but as you go on and you want to become a storyteller, you have to figure out how to string a bunch of images together to then tell your story. Like I liked this quote from Ernst, which was the true power of an image is to evoke emotion and not only to document reality. It is kind of the same, like, but I guess he's focusing on like what the power is. You document reality, especially if you're a documentary photographer. You're documenting things exactly as they are, but again, your focus should be on making sure that the audience understands what emotion that image is trying to pass. And I thought that this image was sort of like perfect. Again, remember we talked about like including context in photography so that people understand where things are coming from. I especially like this image because whenever I think about like sort of like disabled people in Nigeria, the typical image is like they're begging, they're asking for help, or they're just in. I've not seen a lot of imagery around them being in like situations where they're happy or like playing, like doing something other than what we're used to seeing them. So I think that something again that visual storytelling does, and I will compare to that as we go, is try not to sort of like feed into certain stereotypes when you photograph. So this image was of Munil. This here is Munil actually, and friends, para soccer player. So para soccer play game is like pretty much like a part of like football where mostly played by people who are disabled, and then they just roll around and play this sport. And it's being exported outside of Nigeria as well. At the time when I met them, they had gone to Cotonou and I think Kenya to participate in the sport. So I really like this photograph because then it captures an emotion as well. You can see them happy, but you can see them doing what playing the game. So now when you talk about, I've talked about photography and like visual storytelling, but the one thing that's very important in visual storytelling is building a narrative. And when you're building a narrative, the most important thing to think about first is the theme of what you're working on. So let's say you wanted to tell a story on these people. The theme here would be, you can decide what theme it would be. It would probably be like, okay, our soccer players and how. So when I made this project, actually, it's with people who are disabled, and so I had, this project was created in I forget the name, but we had gone across like about 12 different states in Nigeria documenting, and across the states, I was trying to understand like how we deal with how our different communities sort of like relate with people who are disabled across the country. So yeah, the theme for me there was like disability and community, and like just finding that relationship there. And so something that's very important whenever you're trying to build a narrative is to research, because something I always say is there's nothing that isn't already done when it comes to photography, when it comes to storytelling. Literally, there's no story you're thinking about now that if you just do a little Google search, you wouldn't find like something on it already. So when you research, it helps you know what already exists and then understand how to build upon it, how to contribute your own voice to that story. So it isn't like you're just creating what someone else has already done, but you're adding your own narrative and you're adding your own sort of like context to it. Research also helps you, like I said, research helps with context, understanding the historical, cultural, and social background of your subject. So when it comes to understanding cultural background, it kind of helps you know how to respect that space when you step in. And you're not just like taking stories without considering all of these things. So that's what research also helps you do. It helps you also define your focus. Like I said in the beginning, it's like you understand the theme of your story, and then you can sort of like narrow it down to one thing as opposed to like being everywhere. And then when you research as well and sort of like plan before starting a project, you then also understand how to capture important moments. I know that sometimes, like if you're a street photographer, that's different. You can walk on the streets and you take photographs. That's completely fine. When you're working on a body of work, it is important to plan ahead. I know that when you get in the field, like things will happen that will sort of like go beyond whatever you planned for, but it's very important to be prepared in the first place. So some techniques on storytelling. Something I always say is that your light and composition is like a visual vocabulary. This would really help you understand how to tell a story. If your different composition techniques sort of like feed into stories as well. So sometimes you go to if you're watching a film, I'm very big on films as well. If you're watching a film, there's something called like the hero shot, or like the hero shot is when you shoot somebody from like a very high angle and then it makes them look like they are very powerful. So different kinds of shots sort of feed into the narrative and feed into the story. So for this one now, I'm when you start out as a photographer, this is something that's very important, understanding the rule of thirds. And rule of thirds simply is breaking down your frame into 3 different points. Okay, breaking your frame down into 3 different points, and this is how you bring your viewers into your photograph. And it also helps you define the mood of the image as well. Yeah, this is like your basic composition guideline. So something I learned when I was starting out as a photographer is you first of all have to know the rules before you break them. And understanding the rule of thirds here would help you determine how then to move forward. So yeah, so some composition techniques are like using the leading lines, frame within frame, tight cropping. There's asymmetry, there's symmetry, there's tight cropping. Okay, I said that, tight cropping. So this is from my project, All the Faces I've Lived. And I just wanted to give us like an example of what using the leading lines to photograph looks like. So when you look at this image, I find that whenever you consider your leading lines when you're photographing, it helps you, it really makes the image sort of like easier on the eyes for your viewer. And it almost directs your viewer how to look at the image. So you see here, I have framed it directly on this point, and I just thought it was important to point that out. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight again what the leading lines is and how it sort of like helps you direct your vision as like a photographer. So these are some examples of images. Sometimes it's very clear what the leading line is, like in this image by Taiwo Aina, where it starts here and then leads all the way to the person. So when you're looking at this image, I think that as the viewer, it's clear. It's like you know where exactly the photographer wants you to look at. And then in this one as well, my image from the series Take Me to God. And these here act as like your leading lines, because then if you follow these, it sort of like creates this like direction towards the image. So that's another way to draw your audience in. Then this is an example of like frame within frame. I got this image from Amanda Iheme's work, The Way of Life, Stagnation. Here, the focus is this part, and what she's talking about is she's pretty much trying to show us like the ruins of the building, and the way she has photographed it is by using the frame within frame, what's it called, style of photography. And I think that this is absolutely beautiful because you know as the audience where to look at, you know as the viewer what exactly this photographer is trying to say. And for this as well, you know that the direction here is this person and what they're saying and the emotion that they have. So you can see that I've used these individuals to sort of like guide your eyes towards the person. So when it comes to visual storytelling, something that I always think about whenever I am photographing, I think it's something to just have in mind. It might not be that, again, so it's called PACE. It's an acronym called the portrait shot, the action, the close-up, and the establishing shot. So this project that I put here is my project, All the Places I Have Lived. And again, it's following the lives of people who have reverse migrated. So I've always seen Nigeria as a place that's, like when I was growing up, Nigeria was somewhere that I wanted to live. I'm sure that a lot of people can relate to this, like the Jackpot story, because you want to have like life outside of Nigeria and like build outside of Nigeria. So when I did go abroad to school and then I moved back to Nigeria, and then I started seeing even more people coming back to Nigeria, and I became curious. Again, for me, photography always starts from a point of like curiosity, and then there's a question, and then I want to answer that question. And sometimes I look within with self-portraiture, or I then look at like other subjects that can answer that question for me. So I started photographing people around me that I knew had moved back to Nigeria. And I was curious about like what the concept of home means to them, especially if you're someone that has moved through multiple spaces. I began to question like what defines a home, what items or what memorabilia do you carry across all of these spaces that you have lived, and even what the experience of like being back in Nigeria is for them. So I didn't start with this photograph, even though there's a portrait here. When I started the session with her, it was more of just like photography. Telling a story for me always starts with conversation. So even though I know you as a person or like we're friends, whenever I have an idea that I'm going to work on this project, like after my research, I'm deciding, okay, these are the shots, this is the story, this is already what exists. I then move into conversation. So I had a conversation with her and I talked to her about like what I was trying to do, and then sort of like got her comfortable with being in front of the camera. So yeah, as I photographed, portraits came in, because portraits, I wanted to have this portrait here because it was, first of all, when I was making this photograph, honestly, one thing I was thinking about is light. Again, I'll get to that, but I thought that the light here in her room was perfect. And I also wanted her, so this project also feels like a gift to the people that I'm photographing, because I'm also photographing it in spaces that sometimes they move from or currently live in, and I just feel like it would be nice for them to have sort of like would I say like another memorabilia of themselves in that space. So for this particular image, I was mostly thinking about the light and just like photographing her in her room. So that became like my portrait shot, one of my many portrait shots that I have taken for this project. And then I think about like an action shot. She's coming up the stairs. So these images are shot here. This is the establishing shot. It's a photograph of like her at home. This is her home in Ikoyi, in Lagos Island, rather. She grew up here as a child. And then I wanted an action shot to show, because something I started thinking about with this project is home being fluid. I think the phrase home is fluid sort of came to me because home is like a place that is constantly transitioning for them, where you're constantly, even just moving through. If you have a house, you're either moving from your living room to your parlor to your kitchen. You're constantly moving, and I wanted to show what that feels like. And I especially like to use across the images and all the subjects that I've shot. I use the blur to kind of like tell that story of like motion inside the home. Then when it comes to close up, I wanted to show what for her, Wankoso, that's the subject's name. For her, photographs are like the memorabilia that she carries across her home. Funny thing is, after we did this project, she was literally moving back to Germany again the next day. So I think it was very important for us to have done this. So the close-up shot here is it's like a detail shot that kind of shows you what exactly the person is about. And in this image, she was showing me kind of like the timeline of like her life from like when she was small, the different places she has lived in. She's lived in about 7 cities. And I found that very interesting because then for her, home was truly fluid. It was constantly changing and she's had to like change with it as well. So this is something you can keep in mind whenever you're telling a story, is like, okay, what details am I showing? What images is someone going to see and be like, okay, this really establishes what the story is about? What action shots can I include in this project that really tells what the story is about as well, and then include some portraits. Sometimes, again, these are rules that you can just know and then break for your own self, because again, you want to be able to tell stories in your own unique way. I learned these things, but I wouldn't tell you that I applied this every single time I'm photographing. Again, it depends on the story, depends on each story's requirements. And then you can sort of like move from there. Lighting, again, like I was saying, like I thought that this image was just perfect because when it comes to lighting, the one thing I also do like studio photography sometimes for friends. And the one key thing with lighting is like, there are different kinds of light. First off, like I shoot more natural light, but there's artificial light as well. Again, depending on the story that you're trying to tell, you can decide what lighting works best for it. There's your 3-point lighting system, which is like your main lights. You can have like a light at the back, and your key light is usually like in front. Then you have your fill lights and you have your backlights. All of those are kinds of like different lighting systems that you can use when you're trying to tell a story. But for me, that mostly shoots natural lights, I often find like I'm either looking out for like a window, or I'm looking out for like what's it called? A window. Usually, yeah, if it's indoors, it's mostly windows, honestly. Or if it's like a door, then I can open the door slightly. Just think of ways that you can introduce lights that it makes the image sort of like really stand out and create like a natural feel, but also creates like a focus on the person as well. Something I always say is, yeah, follow the lights. Lighting is very important in storytelling. You always have to find like sources of light that can sort of like illuminate the work. Yeah, I know that there's sometimes I've been on assignments and like the place that I'm shooting, maybe I need to photograph somebody inside the house, but then there's no light, and then your mobile phone becomes your light. Or because again, I like to use natural light, but if I have like a mobile phone light, it can sort of like add to that whole story as opposed to just having completely dark images. Because again, the lighting in the photograph would sort of like help you really define the photo better. So finding your unique voice as a storyteller. As a storyteller, I think it's very important to continue shooting. Every single opportunity you get, you cannot find your story without practice. You have to keep exploring. You have to decide what stories sort of like you connect with authentically. I was having a conversation with friends recently, and we're talking about how, like, in the art space, we saw how there was a time where people were mostly like telling stories with blackface. Like, you could see like a lot of artists, like, and again, I think that it was because it was what was selling at the time. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then you can also tell when something is not authentic to people because they then find a way to kind of like, how would I put it? Come up with like a story to fit it, where you can tell that this is not this person's original style, or it's not something that they're exploring for like authentic reasons. There's nothing wrong in, like I say it as well, like there's nothing wrong in like changing or like exploring new ways of storytelling. But I think people can always tell when you're doing something for authentic reasons or just doing it because it's like the rave or it's like the in thing. So constantly engage with your subjects of interest, research and learn about other individuals who are practicing in your field. Copy like an artist, but always credit your inspirations. I think it's very important to copy when you're starting out. I know a lot of people are going to argue with that, but I think that it's important as artists to, or like as photographers, to copy, because then when you copy, you see what other people are doing and you can include it in your work. But you can, sorry, I was reading the message. You can include it in your work, but I think it's very important to credit your inspirations and then grow from them. So don't just copy and like stick to that style forever. Grow and then think of how your own unique eye can be added to that story as you go. As you shoot, if you find your interest changing, move with it and develop it even deeper. When I started out photography, I started out as a street photographer. I was very shy and I wanted to tell stories, but I couldn't come close to people to have conversations enough to even let them photograph me. So I was still short. And in a way, I'm very thankful for that period because one thing, it made me, first of all, very conscious. It made me see better because if you're as a street photographer, you have to wait. Like waiting is a very key thing. You have to wait and make sure you get the right shot. Even in documentary photography, sometimes depending on the situation, if it's like a personal project where you have like control of the situation, you have that time to wait and observe before photographing. But if it's in like a high stake situation, like maybe you're covering a story for a magazine, maybe Reuters, you're out shooting, you might not have that moment to wait. But yes, starting out as a street photographer really helps me be able to see better, understand my environment, be able to read human cues like quickly. And then from then I began to change, I began to evolve. Not saying that I don't still shoot streets, but I started seeing my interests change as I went on. I started photographing, I started doing more close up like documentary photography where I go to my subjects, have conversations and shoot them. And then I also started exploring fine art photography as well, which is where I feel like my art really sits in. And my fine art photography is still a mix of documentary and fine arts and yeah, street photography as well. It's like a combination. But you can see that I did not hold myself back from like evolving. And I think that that's something that's very important as a photographer. You have to constantly evolve. And when you feel like your interests are changing, don't feel like you need to be in a box. Like constantly change with it. Something you always have to think of when you're shooting is like the emotions. I was reading this article and it talked about how like sometimes a lot of people you can get so caught up in like all of the rules that I've talked about, but I think that it's important to know when to use the rules while photographing and other times to just like capture the moment because that is what is important at the time. Capturing that moment is very important. A photo that evokes deep emotion can often have a more significant impact. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, than a technically flawless one. So always strive for a balance, let the emotions and compositions come together, and then paint a full picture. So now this is something that is very, very important as a storyteller, understanding ethical storytelling and cultural sensitivity. Yeah, stories can be a catalyst for change, and so ethical storytelling is very, very important. With ethical storytelling, it's not just about following rules, it's about thinking about your subjects, thinking about the individuals. I don't really like to call people subjects. Thinking about like the individuals that you're working with and how to prioritize their rights and their dignity. I've heard way too many stories of people like stepping into spaces and just feeling like they have like authority to tell that story just because they want to tell the story. No, you have to think about like the people you're engaging with, think about the rights that they have, think about how you can make them comfortable, think about how you can photograph them in ways that are dignifying and that add to their story and paint them in a good light. That's also quite contradictory because on the one end, you can be on a project where the story itself is like how do I put this? The story is not quote unquote like a good story, and you have to tell that story. But I think always thinking about how not to encroach on people's rights as you photograph is very important. So some of the things you have to think about is like taking consent, obtaining consent before photographing. Let me quickly. I wanted to talk about a. What's this now? Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to move this thing so I can access. You know, I'll just bring it down. So this particular body of work that I created for the Center for Cooperative Investigative Journalism, this story was very important. So the point, sorry, I'm trying to buttress a particular point. So the point of this project was to understand why the people in this community called Sabukoji did not have like potable water. They are like an island community surrounded by water, but they didn't have like good drinkable water. And we wanted to understand why. So when we had gone in, the process of like telling this story was first of all, going in to get consent from the Oba. It wasn't something that was easy. It took us about a week plus. And when I say us, it's me and the writer who was working, Festus, who was working on this project. We had to go there multiple times, have conversations with the chief, have conversations with the Oba of the community, and then have conversations with the fixer to make sure that we had good access. And then when we had gotten to a point where they were comfortable with what we were trying to do, they then had a town crier announce to the community that you were going to be seeing like these new faces for a while. I could have easily gone in there, taken a boat, gotten into the community and tried to like sneak my way through the community to tell the story. But then it would break the ethics that I have developed as a photographer and the things that are important. First of all, it would mean that I was taking people's stories without their consent. I would only be still, especially for something as sensitive as like water and the effects it has on the people. So I started, and then it also involves me like staying in the community, getting close to people and having conversations with them to understand exactly how they were being affected by water. So we then eventually found out that they had like about 7 wells in the community. I photographed all of them. That was part of like data collection. And some of the wells, they had to go at a certain time to fetch the water. Like when the water had risen, that was when they would go and collect it. So as early as like 5 a.m., 4 a.m., this image was taken very early in the morning. At around 5 a.m., you can see her kind of like she has gone to fetch water and she's going home to go and pour it into her reservoir at home. Something I also learned was that, and again, you can tell by the images that I had gotten consent and like people were willing to share their story. Something else we had then learned was that they had these, sorry, can you help me open the window? Yeah. Something else I had learned was that they had these tanks that they would drive, these really big tanks that they would drive to like Kirikiri to go and fetch water. But in the process of transporting it back to the community, water from the what's it called? The ocean would get into the tanks. And these tanks are, when people buy the water in the community, they would buy to drink, to bathe, to cook with, and all of that. And then people began to fall sick. At the time when we were there, we didn't really, the only person that I had spoken to that was currently sick and like had typhoid from using the water at the time didn't let me photograph them. So I have no image of that, but it was included in the story, the write-up that Festus wrote. Again, that's where consent comes in. When someone does not give you consent, you are not to take their photograph, regardless of how important that piece of imagery is to the story. You are not to take their photograph. It's up to you to find other ways to either make them comfortable enough that they then let you photograph, or you completely leave it. Yeah, it is because it is their right. So I kind of just wanted to sort of like expand on like consent and how important that is in photography. So yeah, understanding cultural nuances. So when we had gone into that community, because we knew the kind of community that it was, we had researched about Sabokoji, we knew who the king was at the time, we knew who the chiefs were. It made it easy for us to know the protocol to follow whilst in that community. So we went there and we observed. We even had to buy like a bottle of like wine and I think schnapps or so, which they then poured on the ground. There was a lot of like, you could just tell that we understood how to relate better with the community, because we had done research and we understood that the importance of like respecting the space that we were telling, even though the story was very sensitive and something as sensitive as like, okay, because eventually what we had uncovered was that the people who have the business of like going to buy water and come. So in the past, like I think the government had tried to put water in the community. Some NGOs had come as well to put water in the community, but they had they found a way to sort of like they pretty much refused, because if they then had running water in the community, people who had the business of bringing water into the community for as long as, into Sabokoji, for as long as 10 plus years, would then run out of business, because then there's water flowing in the community, right? So it was a sensitive story and we had a duty to tell the story exactly how it was, but we also still had to make sure we got the right consent. And we also partnered with people in the community, because part of the project was collecting data on like the amount of money they spend on water, the amount of people who buy water from the tanks as opposed to using the wells. All of these were data we needed to collect, and we worked with like a pastor at the time who then gathered like a few boys in the community to then go from door to door to collect this data. We had printed like a form, they filled it, they signed, so all of this was done properly. I was just trying to like show like the importance of consent and how it would just make your work much easier when you have consent. Again, I've already touched on this, build rapport. So find people within the community that you can connect with that would help you tell your story better. So all of these things that I'm talking about apply to like documentary storytelling. But even if it was like fine art or portrait photography or whatever photography you're doing, I think it's important to always get consent, especially when it's like a personal project. If you're working with someone and maybe they give you consent in the beginning to take their photographs, and after taking the photographs, they then come later and they tell you they're not comfortable with it, you have no right to share it. Like, I know that some people will say there's like, oh, there's sort of like a loophole around it, but personally, that's my own personal like decision. I will not share, because I have had those situations where I photographed somebody and then they came back later to say they were uncomfortable with it, and I didn't share those images. It would just be images that sit in my archive and I can always go back and look at like, this is what I did. but it would not see the public because consent had been withdrawn. Yeah. So while shooting, avoid stereotypes. Again, if you remember from the beginning when I spoke about Munil and his teammates, again, in Nigeria, the context with like most disabled people is like they're on the road, they're begging, they look a certain way. I would hardly see them like see imagery around them with joy. So when I was photographing them, I was very conscious to make sure that I wasn't like feeding into those stereotypes. So yeah, always challenge stereotypes with your images and check your own preconceived notions, because sometimes you can come into a space and like you already have like an idea of what this space looks like. Oh yeah, to even remember when I was photographing the water story for Sabokoji, I had gone online to see like images around Sabokoji, and like one time there had apparently been a fire, and like there was this one image that I had seen and it looked a certain way. And I'm not gonna lie, I went in there with the mindset that I should create something that looks exactly like this. When I stepped in and I realized that that imagery was not going to work for my story in any way, I didn't hold on to it. Even though it was beautiful, it was not going to be important, so I let it go. Protect identities where necessary. So this kind of feeds into what I had already said. So if an individual is vital to the story, but they're not comfortable with revealing their identity, you can offer them ways to photograph that sort of like hides their identity. You can cover their face, you can blur them. This is where even lighting comes in. In your camera, you can like reduce the shutter speed to like 1/400 or 500 or something. Just shoot them in a way that protects their identity if they're even comfortable with that. And where they are not, you do not coerce them. Explore ways of photographing that protect their identity. Collect accurate data. It is so important. Like what I was saying, where we collected data, because I feel like if we had gone ourselves, we probably wouldn't have had people be even honest enough to give us like the right data for what we were doing. So working with the individuals that live in the community, I think was very vital to that amount of data, to that data being accurate. Because what it is that you're speaking to people that you know and you see every day and you can be honest with. So I think that that's very important. So collecting accurate data. And then when you're done shooting your project, think about what the impact of the image you have created is going to have on the larger community and the individuals. Again, sometimes you can shoot something and it doesn't, it might look nice. I've had instances where I shoot something and it looks nice in camera, and then I take it to my computer and then I see that maybe one of their eyes closed or like something isn't sitting right. Even though the general image might look good and might work, if there's something there that doesn't represent that human being in a good light, please let it go. Because again, just the individuals you work with are important to you, and you should make sure that you're always showing them in the right light. If possible, share the final results with the community / individual you have photographed. Yeah, this is something I do. Like even when I did the water story, like I had shared some of the images I had made, especially with the family. So I had like a contact family, a nurse who kind of like took me around to like different what's it called, people to sort of photograph and like have conversations with. When I took images with her, when I took images of her, rather, I shared it, and like she was like, okay, she's okay with it, and then we moved on with it. So I wanted to talk about ethics. I wanted us to think about it a bit. So I created. So please just leave like feedback in the chat box there. So you arrive late to a demonstration. I thought about this scenario, like you arrive late to a demonstration and you see only a handful of people remaining. To make a stronger photograph on, an organizer should suggest that you gather them together, hold up signs and reenact the protest for your camera. How would you organize the protesters and what angles do you shoot from? So answer this question with the thought of ethics in photography. I haven't really touched on a lot, but ethics in photography cuts down to like multiple places, but I just wanted to know how you would think about something like this. Like, what would you do in this situation? So please leave your comments down in the chat box so that I can. I'm actually waiting on for you guys to leave your comments so that I can sort of like speak on it as well. So think of if you're Nigerian, think of when you were if think of when like it was NSAS and you were photographing, and it even happened to me where I arrived late, like most of the protesters had already left. Most people were sitting down and they were waiting, but there was nothing like actively happening. What would you do in that kind of situation? Like, would you then go and tell them like, okay, everybody come and start shouting and like protesting so I can photograph you? Would that represent the situation, like, honestly? Yeah. Okay. Crystal says, I will take pictures of the remaining. Yeah. I'll take pictures of the remaining of the that I don't think it represents this situation because essentially you want to document the truth. Yeah, fashionista, yes. I agree with that. I don't think it would be an honest or accurate representation, and perhaps not the best idea ethically. Yes, Jan. I would not organize a fake protest, honestly. Yes, that is the answer. So in that kind of situation, especially, I think I should have specified here that you are a documentary photographer. Yeah, if you wanted to use the images to go home and manipulate and like tell a different story, that's a completely different thing. But if you're documenting that thing as a documentary photographer, which is what I was doing at the time, it would not be right to fake the situation, because then if you put that image out there, you're telling a story that this is what you met there and this is how you photographed it. And that is what people then see and then tell sort of like hold on as the truth. And your what's it called? Your goal as a documentary photographer is to not, if you are documenting, can you ask individual people questions about their experiences and then share those stories? Yes, you can. So long as you're representing exactly what they told you and you're not twisting it or adding your own biases um into that feedback that they have given you, you can absolutely do that. So yes, in this situation that I have painted here, no, you will not be organizing them because your job as a documentary photographer is to tell the truth. So I wanted to share a bit about this particular photographer, Michael Ackerman, that photographed this project called End Time City, where I think this was shot in India. And I especially like this work. I came across this work when I did the Women Through the Lens, I think, residency with Michelle Lupidis. And I think at the time when I was looking at these works, the first thing that came to mind is like the images don't necessarily follow all of the typical rules in like how to frame in photography. And I found that very interesting because, again, like I said, sometimes it's not about like having the perfectly framed shot. It's about capturing the emotion and it's about telling the story that needs to be told. So he did this interview with Door of Perception where he describes this as like a heartfelt, visceral engagement with the city. So when you look at the images, that's literally what it feels like. You can tell that there's something a bit visceral about the way he has photographed the city. He called it End Time City because there's a lot of death that happens there, from animals to people. And he calls it like a dark place where, so I found it quite ironical because on the one end, he says that the space is a place of like pilgrimage, where there's always like hundreds of people coming into the city and moving out. But then at the same time, in the same breath, it's also like a place that's like dark and has like death sort of like looming in the space as well. There's a lot of death happening. So the way he photographed it just feels very visceral. And again, you can tell that he's really playing with like this. He has like a unique style with which he documents, and he has a unique style with which he documents, and you can see that across the imagery. And this kind of style you don't come to from just like photographing once or twice. It's from like constant repetition that you are then able to define how you want to tell your story. Something I noticed as well as I was going through this is that he unintentionally there's the acronym PACE, because there's portraits of individuals. I think these are individuals that he came across like in the streets that he photographed. But I think he shot this on film, so you can see a lot of the lights being there's images that are like sort of like blown out, but then it's still beautiful because you can still tell who is there. So again, you have to know the rules before you break them. Yeah, so all of these are shot on film, and I just thought it was a really beautiful work. The way that he has photographed them, and it just really goes to show like his own visual language and how he's telling the story. So now, if you go to a city like this, and maybe you already have like Michael's imagery at the back of your mind, it is now your duty, and you have researched what this place is about. It is now your duty to go and build upon his story as opposed to photographing exactly what he has photographed. This is why research is very important again in photography, like being able to walk into a space and know that, okay, I know what already exists on this space, but I want to build upon what already exists as opposed to just recreating exactly what has existed. So, yeah. So I've been talking a lot, and I hope that from all of this, we kind of like, I see that there are questions in the chat box, but I'll get to them at the end. But from this, I hope that we kind of understand like ethics, and we understand how to implement them, how to shoot, and the things to think about before you shoot. And so now, like when you do decide to become a full-time photography, the question now is like, what opportunities are available to you? There's so many opportunities in this space, especially like for female photographers. I think the stories that like when I started out photography, it was a very male-focused space. But over the years, I have seen how like more female voices, and I think that women are some of like the most wonderful storytellers. And I've seen how they have sort of like their voices have become important and like very important in the space moving forward. And so some opportunities that are available to you are like grants, residencies, there are awards, there are publications, there are exhibitions, there are print sales, and there's space in educating as well. So it all depends on what kind of storyteller you are, what kind of photography you want to do, and how well you have defined your voice as a storyteller. So all of these will determine what opportunities you are available to. Something I always say, like it is very important to have a portfolio. For me, my portfolio is my website. You can go to my website and you can get a sense of who I am as a photographer and the stories that are important to me. Again, like I said, I'm a fine art photographer, and I'm also like a documentary photographer. So when you come to my website, you kind of have like an idea of who I am as a photographer and like the things that I've done. But people will not be able to make these sort of like decisions about you if they don't have access to your work, which is why a portfolio is very important. A portfolio that you can easily access and easily share with people. So yeah, if you're starting out, like it's very important to have like a portfolio. Even if you are a seasoned photographer, like I think everybody will tell you like a portfolio is very important. You put in like your personal projects, maybe your client work, all of that put together in a place that anybody can easily access. And there's so many grants, there's so many opportunities that are available for you as you go. So I wanted to talk about like structuring what again, this is not, how will I put it, this is not set in stone really. I've seen people who within this first year first 2 years they've done all of these things and they are established. I think that because the photography space has definitely evolved, where before, like now social media is playing like a very key role in a lot of people's sort of like trajectory, where someone can tell like a very strong body of have like a very strong body of work and like begin to exhibit and all of that within that first year of like putting that work out. But then again, you are really as good as your portfolio and you're good as like the access that you have. So something that's very important in your first year is to build your portfolio. If you do want to take this as a full-time business, you have to register your business, have like standard contracts of engagements, ways that you relate to clients. So sometimes, like now, like like something I have is a consent form. So especially for my personal work, like if someone wanted to work with me, I would easily share them like this consent form where they would sign and like know that, okay, this particular project we're working on, you consented to it. Because it's one thing to just have like word of mouth, but then it's different when there's something written. But personally, like I said before, even if you've signed a consent form and you come back and you tell me, okay, you're not comfortable with this work anymore being published, I personally would not put it out just because of, especially if it's a personal work. But if it's like a client work or like it's a documentary project and you've signed that consent and I've already shared it out and they've put it out, it's usually hard to like rescind that. But yeah, when it's my personal work, like, and you come and you tell me, no, you're not comfortable with this anymore, I often take it back. Network, I think it's very important when you're starting out to network. Go for workshops. Something that really helped me as a photographer is like multiple workshops that I've gone to. Even now that I'm currently speaking here, I still attend workshops on my own. Gas Foundation is, if you're in Nigeria, Gas Foundation is somewhere that I always speak about. Like they often have like very interesting conversations around photography or just like work as an artist generally. So that's somewhere that you would want to visit often. The New York Times, I know those are portfolio reviews, but it's usually on like when you, what's it called, apply and then they select you. But there are different workshops that are available to you. I think it's just like deciding what kind of photography you want to do and then finding these options. Something I was telling a group I had spoken to recently of like young photographers, because they were talking about how like workshops can be quite expensive. It's called Gas Foundation, GAS. It's in Oniru here in Lagos. I think they even have a talk that's coming up soon as well on archiving, and they have such a wonderful library as well. Yes, Gas Foundation. Thank you. When I started out, there was also the African Artists Foundation. They aren't really functioning now, but I did my first residency there where I created my body of work on alternate identity. But there are so many opportunities. I think that's why networking is important, because then you can find out like these important spaces that you can put yourself in. And I think the notion of recommendation cannot be overemphasized, honestly. Like, I think a lot of the things that have happened for me within the photography space has been from recommendations. Not say like, and again, I wouldn't have those recommendations if you don't network enough and like let people know what you're doing, what you're working on. Sharing your work online also is very, very important. So yeah, this is like the structure that I was thinking about. Then within like your second to fourth year, obviously like you would already be working on this in the first year, like develop a consistent visual style. I think that's very important for people to be able to see your work and be like, okay, that's a Nengi photo, that's a praise photo, that's a Jacqueline photo. Like literally, it is very important for you as an artist, because then honing your visual style would then inform the people who come to you for you to work with. Improve your systems. Something I always do is like I have an invoicing platform, Wave. It's accessible to literally anybody. And what that does is that, first of all, it helps you track your finances, but it also makes whoever you're working with see you as professional. So I hope I'm not over time. Kimmy, I hope I'm good. So yeah, improve
You're
your
good.
system. Okay, thank you. Improve your system, invoicing. I think by this time, like second to fourth, you should have a website. Like I know, like you should have a website. Um, and again, there are platforms. The platform I use for my website is called Portfolio Box, and it's one of the cheapest, honestly. And when I started out with them, I was paying because I've had my website for a while now. I think it's about 6 years. When I started with them, I was paying about $4. Yeah, but now we've gotten to I think about 10 or 12. It's still the cheapest compared to like a lot, but you can even have like a good portfolio on like Behance. Just anywhere that you can go to that you can easily like send to people. Even if you can't have a website at this, it's called Portfolio Box. I'll type it. Okay. So it's honestly one of the cheapest, and you can literally just design your website and like put together like your work very cohesively so that people understand. And again, if you're a photographer that has like different facets, there's nothing wrong in it. First of all, you can have multiple facets, but if you present it in a way that people understand, that you're not confused, that you actually know what you're doing, then it makes sense. And again, like having a website or having like, before I built my website, what I had was like multiple PDFs. So because at some point I used to shoot events as well, I would have like a particular document for like event photography. So if someone reached out and they wanted to get what I did in events, I would send them this particular thing. So it's like I tailored all the portfolios to different types of photography I did. For portrait photography, I had like a portrait portfolio that I would then send to people. And then I had my documentary portfolio as well. Um, so yeah, improving your system, having like an invoicing, you have a website and you have a price guideline. That way it makes it's easier for if people want to work with you, is like you're not then doing like calculations like outside, like you already know exactly what everything will cost and then you can send it to them. It also just helps you looking a bit more professional. Network. I think at every different point in your career, networking is important. There's levels to networking. Like when you start out in photography, there's like peer-to-peer networking where you're just meeting your peers in a space and you're getting to know what they're doing, what's being done, having conversations with people so that your peers can even recommend you. Then when you go higher, you start to you can even do this again. There's no hard and fast rule really. There's just like the general knowledge, and then you can apply it to yourself. And then you begin to network with like institutions, like people who are sort of like I don't want to say important in this way, but yeah, important, like editors. You get to know like editors. As a documentary photographer, it's important to know like editors for like different magazines. And it's as easy as like Googling the magazine and like finding who the editor is, finding their email and sending an email. There's no chance that you get a response, but at least you're putting yourself in the door. Something that is also very important is doing applications. So applying for grants, applying for awards, applying for competitions. You might not win, but if your work is good enough, people will take notice of you. So I've had there was a time I applied for a fair in um Scotland. I had applied for if I think it was a fair in Scotland, I think. I didn't get it. They didn't even write me back. But the following year, someone then reached out to me and said, "Oh, we saw your work as part of like this application." I guess the work was probably strong, but it was not strong enough for the time. But then they were curious to know what else I had done. And then I sent it. And then it started conversations for me there. So something I know it can be hard to get like a lot of. There's this photographer I know called Koltan Kubianga. She's always posting like all the notes she gets from like applications and stuff. And every time I see it, it's always so interesting to me because I'm like, I know that one day you get a yes. But like even I have gotten like like last year, oh my God, I can count like 15 or 20 no's that I got. But it is very important. One thing applications do for you as a photographer is that it also helps you know yourself better, because they'll ask you multiple questions and you have to think, you have to understand what your why to be able to answer these questions. And the more applications you do, the better you know yourself to even do these things. Not saying you only have to wait for applications to do it, but doing all those applications really do help. So apply for them, apply for grants, apply for awards, network. So when you get to this point, like, I think that expanding your services becomes, okay, in 1 minute, expand your services becomes important. Something I've taken that I didn't always start out as a filmmaker, but I have started doing films, and I also do it commercially, just so that I can make more money to fund my personal projects as well. So that's something you should do. Again, apply. Hire support if you need to. If you're going to make it like a proper business, at some point you have to make sure your business is growing beyond just you. So work with people, work with editors, work with maybe an admin assistant that can answer your emails, so you're not keeping emails forever before you respond, and just like establish sustainability. So that's all I have. Thank you so much to everybody that was able to come. Yeah, thank you. Hi, Timmy.
Thank you for that presentation, Nengi. Now on to our Q&A session. So our first question is from Christelle, and
I can stop sharing my screen here, yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. From Christelle, she says that she wants to thank you for shedding light on the disability community. What has been interesting thus far from listening to your presentation is the choice of words you have used to describe the disability community on this part of the world. Curious to see how language is used differently across the world. We often refer to those with disabilities as people with disabilities. Using the word people first and disability next helped to humanize the individual. I'm interested to know, one, what led to your interest in showcasing the resilience of the disability community? And two, are there any discussions on the continent or Nigeria in particular regarding language usage as it pertains to people with disabilities? She says this is a mouthful, so thanks for indulging me.
Absolutely. I honestly, personally, I do say people with disability as well. I have used that like in speaking about disabled people. I haven't been in a lot of spaces where the conversation, but I know that there are conversations being had about like the community, like the disabled community, the people living with disabilities, and I know that that's definitely something that they do prefer to be referred to. So yes, there are conversations here. It was my bad to say disabled people, but I do remember to use people living with disabilities most times. But yes, yeah, there are questions. There are conversations rather.
Great, thank you for that. The next question is from Adora. She says, what steps can we take to ensure people are active participants in how their stories are told, not just subjects? Who gets to decide what is dignified or respectful in an image, the photographer, the editor, or the community being portrayed?
That's a very good question. Yeah. I think there's multiple layers to it. First of all, that's why I said, so for me, over the years, what I've done is I have decided, like I have like my own sort of like guideline for what works as like a good enough photo that shows this person in the right light. So can you repeat the question again? I just want to make sure I'm.
No, of course. Don't worry. So she says,
I'm trying to here,
what steps, yeah, it's in the chat as well. So what steps can we take to ensure people are active participants in how their stories are told, not just subjects? So her question is, who gets to decide what is dignified or respectful in an image? Is it the photographer, the editor, or the community being portrayed?
Okay, thank you. I found it here as well, so I can follow through. So the first part about being active participants, conversation, honestly, for me, whenever I have conversations with people and they understand what the story I'm telling is about, it then makes it easier for them to intentionally be part of the project. When they don't understand what they're being photographed for or like the reason, which is why honesty is part of like the ethics of documentary photography, making sure that people know what exactly they're participating in, it makes them then become active. But if they don't, again, if you explain to them, there's no guarantee that they would also want to be active, right? But it is your duty to make sure that you explain to them and they understand, and then they give consent to be part of that project. And where they don't, it is up to you to find somebody else who would then give consent for it. So who gets to decide what is dignified or respectful? This is very interesting. And I go back to this water story. So when I was photographing the water story, okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. There's a part of the story where I needed to show that the kids in the community were also part of like they work alongside like other people to bring water into the community. So part of the kinds of water, they bring in pure water, they bring in bottled water. And sometimes when the boats come into shore with the bags of water, kids go and carry it and then they transport it to different stores in the community or like to homes, and then they pay them for it. Now, in documentary photography, there's conversations around like photographing children and how they don't have the right to give consent. But because that particular imagery was part of the story that I wanted to tell, what I ended up doing was like, I made a portrait of a child carrying water on their head, but I had them turn their back towards the camera. So now you see that I can't get, for me to go to the child's house to get consent from their parent before then photographing would have been long and like taken away from the moment, but I wanted to still tell the story. And then the other kids that I photographed as well, even though the publication didn't end up using those particular images, I blurred out, like I shot in a way that blurred out their face, but at least you can tell that if you were to look at the image, you'd understand that it's children carrying this thing. So when I then was having conversation with the editor, he wasn't comfortable with children being shown as part of the project because he felt like and again he was not an African editor. So, and again, I know that the context for them is completely different for the context for us. Here in Nigeria, where children are like part of like the home in terms of like, especially in poor communities where children are like part of like contributing to like the finances and all of that, it is important to show that, but at the same time, to show it in a dignified way. So there are different levels to it. There's the editor's own personal biases that would come into it. And then there's your own as well. So I think, again, boils down to, if you're doing it for like a magazine, they would have their own ethics on like what can fly and what cannot fly, and you have to abide by that. But if it's your own personal work, then you decide what is ethical. And again, you can only make that decision from research, from understanding the context, the cultural context, the ethical context, all of those things before you then make that decision.
Lovely. And we have another question from Adora. She says, how do we ensure consent is meaningful when communities may not fully understand the reach of digital and social media images? Another good question.
That's actually a very good question. How do we ensure consent is meaningful when communities may not fully understand the reach of digital social media images? I think that so in terms of like context, like, so again, back to this story that I worked on, and even like my own personal work as well. This community, the people in the community, Sabokoji, again, what I had done was that I worked with a nurse, someone who, okay, she's part of the community and she's learned, and she could first of all like explain it to them in ways that I probably couldn't have. So then when their consent was given, they understood like, okay, these images are going to be, we told them it was going to be published, we told them the places that they were going to see themselves. And even at the end, I sent the link to them and I didn't necessarily have any issues. But yeah, I think finding people who understand the community well enough to relate exactly what is being done to them definitely helps to make sure that the consent that you're getting is like well informed. But yeah, when you think about it, like in the end, I think sometimes like you really can't control it, right? It's like, again, people can understand to an extent, but then they would end up seeing themselves on social media and feel completely different about it. But what is important is that, can you beat your chest and say, I communicated clearly to them and I didn't leave any stories out. I think that's as far as I operate.
Thank you. Another question from Nay. She says, in photojournalism, do you share the intended narrative with your subjects? I'm sure Ackerman's research framed his perspective, but curious about the balance between your narrative and the lived realities you're looking to share.
Sorry, I'm trying to find it so I can read it.
It's from Nay, N-A-A.
It's from who?
Nay, N-A-A.
She just sent it?
A bit ago. She says, in photojournalism, do you share the intended narrative with subjects? I'm sure Ackerman's research framed his perspective, but curious about the balance between your narrative and the lived realities you're looking to share. So essentially, do you tell your subject like the vibe of like, you know, the vision you're going for, essentially, I think.
So yes, I do, especially if you have a particular visual style. I think one thing, a lot of Ackerman's images look like they were like shot on the street. There are portraits that are like where he's like face on with people and photographing them, but the rest look like he seems like more of like a street photographer who goes around photographing in certain ways and stealing shots. There's no consent that's necessarily being given, but it kind of works with like the way he's trying to tell the story. But then when you have particular people that you're sorry, what was the I'm completely losing my train of thought. Just one more time. This is why I prefer to read the story.
No, you're fine. From Nay, she said, do you share the intended narrative with the subjects?
Yes. So I do. When I was working on that water story, I had told the nurse exactly what we were trying to uncover, and I think for them that particular one was very interesting because they also wanted that story told. Most of the other subjects that I even ended up photographing too were people that wanted the story told. The only people who were not open to being photographed were the shot callers, in terms of like the people who sell the water, who have like the community, who have like the agency that pretty much runs the water community, the water selling and all. Those were the only people who refused to let me photograph, especially because I had told them exactly what we were trying to do. So yes, there I do communicate it. I do let them know what it is. Except it's in photojournalism where it's like you are just sent into, okay, like I had to shoot the elections for Reuters, and it was more of a go and capture the environment, capture the scenario, capture exactly what is going on. And I did that and I photographed. There was not really like any communication because it was more just like getting things exactly how it is in that space. So yes, when it's conversations that are like in person, yes, I would have this conversation.
Lovely. And another question from Praise. She says it's been an amazing session with you. She's currently exploring visual impact storytelling after 3 years of working with nonprofit organizations to develop and implement communication strategies that help them connect to their target audience. I'm currently drawn to visual storytelling through documentaries, which I'm already doing with some organizations. I'd appreciate if you could share platforms and communities I can learn more about creative directing for impact documentaries.
Okay, I can definitely, what I'll do is I'll add that to the slide and I'll share that with you so you can share it with the rest of the community. So I'll do some more research and just find, I think I have a few off the top of I can't remember them currently, but I can definitely put something together and share.
No, that would be amazing. And that connects to Dora's other question, which is if they can get a link to the presentation.
Oh, definitely. I'll send that to you and everyone can have it.
Okay, another question from Lagana. Thank you for a beautiful conversation. Do you have any advice for those interested in capturing objects such as jewelry or decorations as opposed to people? How does the storytelling change when you're focusing on specific objects instead of people? Would you say the advice remains the same?
I think it does remain the same. I think I think it's important. So now, first of all, there's like the commercial side of like photographing jewelries and decorations. Like there are people whose main focus are just like documenting. I think that's like product photography. But when you want to then move it to storytelling, I think you then start to, I think it would still in even when it's product photography, there's still like the human aspect of it. And when it comes to storytelling, you can then begin to think about there's so many ways you can think about it. You can think about it from the angle of like maybe say generational jewelry, like people who have passed on jewelry from like generation to generation, like the meaning of it, or there's just different ways. I think when it comes, that's why research is important, right? Like understanding what exactly already exists around it in terms of storytelling, and then deciding what you want to add to it. So yeah, the it's still the same. It's still the same. If you're coming at it from a purely commercial angle, I think your research will mostly be around making sure that you are using light in the right way to represent these objects, and like using how you can infuse people or not infuse people, like what other objects can like hold up jewelries in ways that other people haven't done. When you're thinking about it from a storytelling angle, I think that the human connection then comes in, because then you have to think about like use and like how, yeah, this it's pretty much the same.
I'm from Fatima. Hello, thank you for an amazing presentation. My question is, as a business owner, how can I balance telling a story and selling my products? In other words, how can I make sure my audience does not get lost in the story?
That's a very interesting one. I think that first of all, I think something I didn't mention was that when you're starting out, is it's very important to build an audience that understands what you're doing. So if your audience understands that, sorry, if your audience understands that your work as a photographer, so it's about storytelling, then it shouldn't be a problem. Like it shouldn't be a problem. If um selling my products, I'm not sure what you mean. What products are you exactly selling? How can I balance telling a story plus selling my products? But because like I think every product, there's a story around every product. That's something I believe in. Like there's a story around every product. So if your audience understands that this is something that's important to you, I don't think it'll get lost. I don't think it'll get lost.
Okay, that was the last question that we have time for today. Thank you for your questions, everyone. That's the end of the Q&A. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Today's session is over. For future workshops and information on the Africa Center Studio Women's Creative Exchange, please check the link in the chat. Goodbye, everyone.
Sorry, give me a second. I want to copy the question about the thing I should add to the document.
Yes.
So just give me a second. Okay, yes. Copy so I can add that. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you guys so much.